They were laughing as they ripped her dress, phones out, hands everywhere until the bar went dead silent. One man stepped through the door, tattoos visible, eyes locked on the girl in the chair. The mobsters froze because they knew exactly who he was and what they had just done. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. Every server at the Red Vein knew the night's unspoken rules. The bar was not just a business, it was a stage where mobsters performed dominance, where women existed to serve and endure, and where certain wounds were inflicted just to watch someone bleed. At the center of tonight's entertainment stood Alicia Diaz, 26, bronze-skinned with dark hair pulled tight in a practical bun, her black uniform pressed despite its age. Her posture was controlled, deliberate, like someone who'd learned long ago that showing fear only made predators hungrier. The Red Vein occupied a basement space in the city's industrial district, all exposed brick and amber lighting that made everyone look either glamorous or dangerous. Vintage photographs lined the walls, boxers, politicians, men whose smiles hid bodies. The bar itself stretched along the left side, bottles arranged like trophies, brass taps gleaming under pendant lights that cast pools of gold across the dark wood. But it was the back corner that mattered tonight. 3 mobsters occupied the round table like kings holding court. The ringleader sat center, thick-necked, early 30s, with dark hair slicked back and a scar splitting his left eyebrow. His brown vest stretched tight across his chest, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, gold chain catching light every time he moved. His name was Leo, and everyone knew Leo's cruelty was performance art. To his left sat the laugher, younger, leaner, with a beard trimmed sharp and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore his vest looser, sleeves rolled to reveal forearm tattoos that spelled out names of the dead. He laughed at everything, Leo said, loud enough to make sure everyone knew who held power. The third man was quieter, tattooed heavily up both arms and neck. He watched Alicia with cold calculation, his vest abandoned on the chair back, white shirt revealing more ink across his collarbone. He didn't laugh, he studied, like a butcher sizing up meat. Alicia moved through the space with practiced efficiency, her tray balanced, her eyes down. She'd worked here 6 months, long enough to know which tables to avoid and which jokes to deflect. Every touch ignored, every comment swallowed, every humiliation filed away in the locked box where she kept everything that hurt. Tonight felt different. Leo raised a hand, rings glinting. Alicia, right? Come here, sweetheart. She stopped at the required distance, tray held like a shield. Can I get you gentlemen anything else? Leo grinned at his companions. You hear that, gentlemen? She thinks we're civilized. He turned back, eyes narrowing with mock curiosity. You got family around here? Boyfriend? Brother? Someone looking out for you? The question hung in the air like a noose. Alicia's jaw tightened. No, sir. Just me. Just you, Leo repeated slowly, tasting the words. He exchanged glances with his crew, and something shifted, a predator catching scent. That's dangerous. Pretty girl, no protection. This city eats women like you alive. The laugher stood first, blocking her path to the bar. Where are you going? We're having a conversation. I have other tables, Alicia said, her voice level despite the hammer of her heart. Leo rose now too, his bulk casting shadow. Other tables can wait. See, there's something about you. He circled closer, invading space meant to stay empty. You walk like you think you're too good for this place, like you're slumming it with us working folk. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, not violent, but firm enough to trap. Let go, Alicia said quietly. Leo smiled. Or what? The third mobster moved behind her, cutting off escape. The bar's ambient noise, glasses clinking, conversation humming continued like nothing was wrong. Because nothing was wrong. Not here. Not in the Red Vein, where men did what they wanted and women learned to take it. Alicia's mind flashed unbidden to another night. Gunfire. Her mother's scream cutting short. Her father's blood-soaked hands reaching for a daughter who flinched away and never stopped running. Never again, she'd sworn. Never need him again. But the men were moving now, hands gripping her arms, forcing her backward toward their table. The laugher kicked out a chair, white cushion, wooden frame, and they shoved her down into it. Alicia twisted, tried to stand, but Leo's hand pressed her shoulder down with casual violence. Relax, he said, his breath hot against her face. We just want to see what's under that uniform. What you're hiding." The tattooed man pulled out his phone, angling for the perfect shot. Other patrons watched now, some uncomfortable, most entertained. A few pulled out their own phones. The bartender polished glasses and looked away. Leo's fingers hooked into the collar of her uniform. The fabric pulled taut at her throat. "Let's see if you're as tough as you act." Alicia fought, kicked, twisted, but there were too many hands. The laugher grabbed her left arm, the tattooed man, her right, pinning her to the chair while Leo pulled. The fabric strained. "Stop!" Alicia gasped, hating how her voice broke. "Please." Leo yanked hard. The uniform tore down the front with a sound like violence made audible, fabric ripping, seams splitting, buttons scattering across the floor like casualties. Her white undershirt showed through the ruined dress, her dignity shredded alongside it. Laughter erupted, phones captured. The room became a theater of cruelty, and Alicia was center stage. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of hands, the heat of eyes, the crushing familiarity of being powerless again. Leo grabbed more fabric, pulling it wider, exposing more. "Look at that, she's actually crying. I thought you were tough, Alicia. I thought—" The bar door opened, not with a bang, not with a crash, just the quiet creak of hinges, and then silence. The kind of silence that happens when death walks into a room and everyone recognizes it at once. Alicia looked up through tear-blurred vision and saw him. Black suit, tailored but lived in. No tie. White shirt open at the collar. Silver threaded through his dark hair. Swept back from a face carved by violence and time. Tattoos visible on his hands, creeping up from his wrists, ink earned through decades of survival. His eyes were dark, unreadable, scanning the room with the calm of someone who'd walked into worse and walked out alive. But when those eyes found Alicia restrained, uniform torn, face wet with tears, something behind them broke. Nicholas Diaz stood in the doorway of the Red Vein like a ghost returning to haunt his own legend. Leo's hand froze mid-laugh. His face drained of color as recognition dawned, not gradual, but instant and absolute, like watching someone realize they'd just swallowed poison. The laugher released Alicia's arm and stepped back. The tattooed man's phone clattered to the table. The entire bar held its breath. Alicia's lips parted, voice barely a whisper. No, but her father was already walking toward her, his movements unhurried, inevitable, each step erasing years of distance, each footfall a countdown to reckoning. When he reached the table, he didn't look at the men. He looked only at his daughter, and his voice when it came was soft enough to break. "Alicia." He removed his suit jacket with careful precision and draped it across her shoulders, covering what they'd exposed. Then Nicholas Diaz turned to face the men who'd made the worst mistake of their lives. To understand why Alicia Diaz would rather endure humiliation than speak her father's name, you have to go back 8 years to the night her childhood ended in gunfire and her mother's blood painted their kitchen floor. The Diaz home had been a contradiction. Marble countertops and bulletproof windows, fresh flowers in crystal vases and guns hidden in every room. Alicia grew up in luxury, wrapped in fear, never sure which version of her father would walk through the door, the man who kissed her forehead and checked her homework, or the ghost who came home at 3 a.m. with blood on his collar and death in his eyes. Nicholas Diaz had been a king in those days. Not the quiet, silver-haired man who just walked into the Red Vein, but something louder, sharper, more dangerous. He'd built an empire on fear and loyalty, carved his name into the city's underworld with violence so calculated it became legend. People whispered his name like a prayer or a curse, depending on which side of his mercy they stood. But empires built on blood always demand more blood. Alicia remembered the night perfectly, the kind of memory that doesn't fade but calcifies, becoming sharper and more painful with time. She'd been 18, studying for finals at the kitchen table while her mother, Christina, prepared late dinner. The house smelled of garlic and cilantro, her mother humming something old in Spanish, her father due home any minute. Christina Diaz had been the only soft thing in Nicholas's world. Where he was stone, she was water. Where he commanded, she invited. She'd loved him despite everything he was, or perhaps because underneath the violence, she still saw the boy from her neighborhood who'd promised to protect her from everything. She just never imagined she'd need protection from his life. The first gunshot came through the kitchen window. Alicia remembered her mother's humming cutting off mid-note, remembered the sound of glass exploding inward, remembered her mother's body jerking backward like a puppet with cut strings. "Mama!" Alicia screamed, diving under the table as more shots followed, systematic, professional, the sound of a hit executed with precision. Christina crumpled to the tile floor, blood spreading beneath her like a crimson shadow. Her eyes found Alicia's, wide and confused, her hand reaching out but not quite making it. "Run," Christina whispered, her voice wet and broken. "Run, mi amor. Don't let him." The words died with her. Alicia crawled to her mother, pressing hands against wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, screaming for help that wouldn't come fast enough. She held Christina as the light left her eyes, as her mother's blood soaked through Alicia's school uniform, as the woman who'd sung lullabies and braided her hair and promised everything would be okay became just a body on expensive tile. Nicholas arrived 10 minutes later with his crew, guns drawn, too late for everything that mattered. He dropped to his knees beside his wife, hands shaking as he touched her face. "No, no, Christina, no." His voice cracked like something breaking that couldn't be fixed. But Alicia saw what he didn't want her to see. She saw him check the angles, calculate the trajectory, understand immediately what had happened. The hit had been meant for him. The shooters had mistaken Christina's silhouette for his. They'd killed the wrong person. "This is your fault," Alicia had said, her voice cold and clear through her tears. "Your life, your enemies, your fault." Nicholas looked at her then, his hands still covered in Christina's blood, and something in his face died alongside his wife. "Alicia, don't." She stood, her mother's blood staining her clothes, her hands, everything. "Don't you dare say my name. Don't you dare try to—" Her voice broke. "She's dead because of you, because of what you are, because you chose this life over us." "I chose this life to protect you," Nicholas said, desperation bleeding through his usual control. "Everything I built to keep you both safe." "Safe?" Alicia laughed, the sound jagged and wrong. "She's dead, Papa. That's how safe we are." The next weeks blurred together. The funeral where men in expensive suits paid respects with blood still on their hands. The house that became a mausoleum. The way Nicholas tried to reach for her and she pulled away every time, his touch feeling like contamination. He'd offered everything. Money, protection, a new house far from the city. He'd promised to leave the life, to walk away from the empire, to be just a father if that's what she needed. But Alicia saw the truth. Men like Nicholas Diaz didn't leave. The life didn't let go. And even if he walked away, his enemies wouldn't forget. His name would always be a target painted on anyone foolish enough to love him. "I don't want your money," Alicia had told him the night she packed her bags. "I don't want your protection. I don't want anything that came from what you do. Alicia, please." Nicholas's voice had carried a desperation she'd never heard before. "Let me keep you safe. Let me—" "You can't keep anyone safe," she'd screamed. "You kept Mama safe, remember? You promised her she'd be fine, that your enemies wouldn't dare, that your name was protection enough. How did that work out?" The words had landed like bullets. Nicholas flinched, his face collapsing into something older, more broken. "If you ever loved me," Alicia said quietly, "you'll let me go. You'll stay away. You'll let me build a life that has nothing to do with you or your world or any of this blood." Nicholas had stood silent for a long moment, his jaw working, his hands clenched at his sides. Finally, he nodded once sharp, final. "If that's what you need," he said, his voice barely audible. "If that's what keeps you alive and free, then go. I won't follow. I won't interfere. I'll let you disappear." Alicia had left that night with one suitcase and her mother's necklace. She'd changed cities, changed her life, taken jobs that paid in cash and asked no questions. She'd chosen poverty over blood money, exhaustion over luxury, anonymity over the protection of her father's name. She'd sworn never to need him again, and for 8 years, she'd kept that promise scraping by, working nights, surviving on pride and stubbornness, and the belief that distance from violence meant safety, until tonight. Until cruel hands tore her uniform and her father walked through the door, his eyes carrying 8 years of grief and guilt and love that never stopped. Even when she demanded it should, the silence in the red veins stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Nicholas Diaz's jacket hung across Alicia's shoulders, expensive fabric still warm from his body, smelling of cologne and old smoke and a past she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. She pulled it tighter around herself, covering the torn uniform, her hands shaking despite her efforts at control. Leo stood frozen 3 feet away, his face cycling through emotions, confusion, recognition, terror. The scar above his eyebrow seemed to pulse with each rapid beat of his heart. His rings caught the amber light as his hand slowly rose in a gesture that was part surrender, part disbelief. "Mr. Diaz," Leo stammered, his voice stripped of its earlier cruelty. We didn't know." Nicholas said nothing. He simply looked at Leo the way a man might look at an insect he was deciding whether to crush or ignore. His tattooed hands hung loose at his sides, relaxed in the way only truly dangerous men could manage, the kind of calm that preceded violence so absolute it didn't need to be rushed. The laugher had backed against the wall. His earlier bravado evaporated. His beard couldn't hide how young he suddenly looked, maybe 25, playing at being a gangster, wearing a vest and attitude like they made him untouchable. He was learning how wrong he'd been. The tattooed mobster, the quiet one who'd filmed everything, had gone pale beneath his ink. His phone sat abandoned on the table, screen still glowing with the last frame he'd captured. Alicia's face, tears streaming, uniform torn, evidence of a crime he was just beginning to understand the weight of. "Get up," Nicholas said to Alicia, his voice soft but carrying through the silent bar like a command from God. Alicia stood on unsteady legs, his jacket falling to mid-thigh, covering her. She wanted to throw it back at him, to tell him she didn't need his protection now or ever, to scream that he had no right to walk back into her life just because he'd witnessed her lowest moment. But her voice wouldn't come. Her body betrayed her, gravitating toward him like he was safety instead of everything she'd run from. Nicholas moved slightly, positioning himself between Alicia and the three mobsters. He still hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a threat, hadn't touched a weapon. He didn't need to. "You know who I am," Nicholas said. "Not a question." Leo nodded jerkily. "Yes, sir, we know. Everyone knows." "Then you know what you've done." The laugher found his voice, desperate and cracking. "We didn't know she was yours, Mr. Diaz. We swear. She never said she works here. We thought she was just..." "Just what?" Nicholas asked, his tone almost curious. "Just a woman you could humiliate? Just someone with no protection, no value, no name that mattered?" He paused, letting the words settle. "Is that what you thought?" No one answered. Alicia watched the scene unfold, feeling disconnected from her own body. These were the same men who'd laughed while tearing her uniform minutes ago, the same men who'd held her down, filmed her, reduced her to entertainment. Now they looked like children caught stealing, their faces slack with fear, their earlier power revealed as nothing but performance in a room that allowed it, until someone bigger walked in. Leo tried again, his voice steadier but still edged with panic. "Mr. Diaz, with respect, we run business here. The Red Vein is neutral territory under Kozlov's protection. We had no way of knowing your daughter was..." "My daughter," Nicholas interrupted quietly, "has a name. Use it." Leo swallowed hard. "Alicia. We had no way of knowing Alicia was connected to you. She's been working here 6 months, never mentioned family, never asked for special treatment. How were we supposed to..." "You weren't supposed to touch her at all," Nicholas said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "Connected or not, protected or not. You weren't supposed to put your hands on any woman who didn't want them there. But that's not how you operate, is it?" The tattooed mobster finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "It was just a joke, man. We were just messing around. We didn't mean..." "You tore her clothing off while she begged you to stop," Nicholas said, each word precise and cutting. "You restrained her, filmed her, laughed while she cried. Which part of that was the joke?" Alicia felt something crack inside her chest. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected her father to name exactly what had been done to her, to give voice to the humiliation she'd been trying to minimize in her own mind. Part of her had already started the process. Every woman knew too well, making it smaller, less traumatic, survivable, just guys being guys, just a bad night, just the price of working in a place like this. But Nicholas wouldn't let it be small. "Do you know why she's here?" Nicholas continued, his eyes never leaving the three men. "Why she works in a place like this instead of living in comfort? Because 8 years ago, I failed to protect her mother. I built an empire that made enemies, and those enemies put bullets through my kitchen window. Wrong target, wrong death, but my fault." Alicia's breath caught. She'd never heard him say it out loud, never heard him take ownership so completely. "My daughter ran from me because my life killed her mother," Nicholas said, his voice carrying an edge of something raw and broken beneath the control. "She chose poverty over my money, chose exhaustion over my protection, chose to work here, in a mob bar, serving men who think they own the world, because even that was safer than being my daughter." He took one step toward Leo, and the man flinched. "And you three?" Nicholas said softly. "You thought you could take what was left of her dignity. You thought because she had no name, no protection, No one to call, that she was yours to destroy. The bar remained frozen. Patrons who'd watched and laughed earlier now studied their drinks with sudden intensity. The bartender had disappeared into the back room. Even the music had stopped, leaving only the hum of refrigeration and the ragged breathing of three men realizing they'd crossed a line drawn in blood. "Here's what happens now," Nicholas said, his tone almost conversational. "You're going to give me every phone in this bar that recorded what you did. Every single one." The tattooed man moved immediately, grabbing his phone and placing it on the table with shaking hands. "Then," Nicholas continued, "you're going to kneel and apologize to my daughter. 3 hours earlier, before the bar, before the humiliation, before everything fractured and reformed." Nicholas Diaz sat in the back of a black town car watching rain streak down the tinted windows. The city passed by in blurred neon and shadow. Familiar streets he'd once ruled now feeling foreign, like visiting a kingdom he'd abdicated but never quite left behind. "You sure about this, boss?" The driver, Rafa, 60 years old with gray stubble and hands scarred from decades of loyalty, glanced in the rearview mirror. "It's been 8 years. Maybe she doesn't want to be found." "She works at the Red Vein on Fletcher," Nicholas said quietly. "Tuesday through Saturday, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. She takes the bus home, walks 4 blocks to a studio apartment above a laundromat. She doesn't want to be found, but I've always known where she is." Rafa said nothing. He'd been there the night Christina died, had helped carry her body, had watched Nicholas break in ways that didn't show but never healed. Nicholas pulled out his phone, scrolling through a folder marked only with a date the day Alicia left. Inside were reports. Not invasive surveillance, nothing that crossed into her actual life, but breadcrumbs of existence. Hospital bills he'd paid anonymously when she had pneumonia 2 years ago. A landlord he'd quietly convinced not to evict her when she was short on rent. 3 different men who'd followed her home with bad intentions, all of whom had disappeared before reaching her door. Protection without presence, love without permission. "What are you going to say to her?" Rafa asked, navigating through evening traffic. Nicholas stared at his reflection in the window, older now, more silver than black in his hair, lines carved deeper around his eyes. The tattoos on his hands had faded slightly but still told their stories. A rose for Christina on his left hand, Alicia's birth date in Roman numerals on his right. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe that I'm sorry. Maybe that I've changed. Maybe that I understand why she ran and I don't blame her for it." He paused. "Maybe nothing. Maybe just seeing her is enough." But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. 8 years of watching from a distance, of knowing she was alive but not knowing if she was happy, if she was safe in ways that mattered beyond physical threats. 8 years of wanting to reach out and respecting her boundary instead. 8 years of loving someone who'd asked him to stop. The town car pulled to a stop 3 blocks from the Red Vein. Nicholas had chosen the distance deliberately close enough to walk, far enough that his arrival wouldn't be announced by the car. Some habits from the old life never died. Always control your entrance. Always know your exits. Always be aware of who sees you coming. "Want me to wait?" Rafa asked. "No. Go home to Maria. Tell her I said hello." Nicholas stepped out into the rain, letting it soak into his suit jacket, the cold a welcome sensation against the numbness he'd been carrying for years. He'd built an empire once, brick by brick, body by body. He'd been feared, respected, untouchable. Men had crossed streets to avoid him, or crossed themselves when they heard his name. He'd believed power was protection, that fear kept the people he loved safe. Christina's death had taught him otherwise. After Alicia left, Nicholas had done what she demanded, stayed away, didn't follow, didn't interfere. But he'd also done what she hadn't asked for, dismantled large portions of his empire. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly over years. Territories sold off, alliances dissolved, operations shut down. He'd kept just enough to remain protected, to maintain the network that let him watch over Alicia from a distance, to ensure old enemies understood that Nicholas Diaz might be quieter but wasn't gone. He'd become a ghost of his former self, by choice, by penance. Walking toward the Red Vein, Nicholas passed familiar corners where he'd once collected debts and settled scores. The city had changed, new businesses, new players, new generation of criminals who knew his name as legend rather than present threat. Some nodded respectfully when they recognized him. Others looked confused, like seeing a museum piece walking the streets. He'd planned this moment for months, rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd approach, whether he'd even go inside or just watch from across the street to confirm she was okay. The fantasy version had Alicia surprised but not hostile. a conversation that cracked open the possibility of forgiveness. Maybe coffee somewhere neutral, where they could talk without 8 years of pain filling every silence. He'd never imagined he'd walk in to find her being destroyed. The rain had soaked through his jacket by the time he reached the Red Veins entrance. He paused outside, hand on the door, suddenly uncertain. What if she was happy here? What if his presence shattered whatever peace she'd built? What if the greatest act of love was continuing to stay away? Then he heard the laughter through the door, male voices, cruel and loud. The kind of laughter that came at someone else's expense. Nicholas pushed the door open. The scene assembled itself in fragments. Alicia in a chair, arms restrained, uniform torn. 3 men surrounding her like wolves. Phones recording, her face wet with tears but her jaw still set, still fighting, still refusing to break completely. Everything else, the careful approach, the rehearsed words, the gentle reintroduction evaporated. What remained was primal and simple. His daughter was being hurt, and he'd failed to protect her again. The walk across the bar felt infinite and instantaneous. Each step calculated, unhurried, inevitable. He watched the recognition spread through the room like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Conversations died. Glasses stopped clinking. The mobsters' laughter caught in their throats. When Nicholas reached Alicia, when he saw the damage up close, the torn fabric, the bruises forming on her wrists from restraint, the devastation in her eyes, something inside him made a decision that bypassed thought entirely. He removed his jacket with careful precision. The same hands that had once killed without hesitation, now moving with infinite gentleness. He draped it across her shoulders, covering what they'd exposed, giving back what they'd tried to take. Alicia, he said softly, her name both prayer and apology. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw everything, hatred and relief, anger and desperate need. The little girl who'd once called him Papa, and the woman who'd sworn never to need him again. 8 years of distance collapsed into one moment. And Nicholas Diaz, legendary boss, feared killer, ghost of an empire, stood before his daughter not as any of those things, but simply as a father who'd arrived too late but refused to fail again. "Kneel," Nicholas repeated, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who'd never had to ask twice. Leo's face twisted through several emotions, pride warring with survival instinct, humiliation battling against the primal understanding that defiance here meant death. His knees bent slowly, reluctantly, until he was on the bar floor, expensive pants soaking up spilled beer and years of grime. The laugher followed immediately, dropping hard enough that his kneecaps cracked against wood. The tattooed man went last, his jaw clenched, ink-covered hands balled into fists even as he lowered himself in submission. 3 mobsters who'd ruled this room minutes ago now knelt before the woman they'd torn apart. "Say it," Nicholas commanded. Leo's voice came out strangled. "We're sorry. Alicia, we're sorry for—" "Look at her when you speak," Nicholas cut him off. "You looked at her while you hurt her. You can look at her now." Leo raised his eyes, and Alicia saw genuine fear there, not remorse, not shame, but terror of consequence. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry Nicholas Diaz had witnessed it. "We're sorry," Leo said, forcing the words out like stones. "We shouldn't have touched you. We were wrong." The laugher echoed the sentiment, his voice thin and quick, words tumbling over each other in his hurry to appease the man standing behind Alicia, like a reckoning made flesh. The tattooed man said nothing, his silence stretching until Nicholas moved just a slight shift of weight. But it was enough. "I'm sorry," the tattooed man finally ground out, each word costing him something. Alicia stood frozen, Nicholas's jacket heavy on her shoulders, watching 3 grown men kneel and apologize while meaning none of it. She should have felt vindicated, should have felt powerful, should have felt something other than the hollow nausea spreading through her chest. Because this wasn't justice. This was her father's name doing what it always did, bending the world through fear, demanding submission through reputation built on decades of violence. These men weren't sorry. They were scared. And the moment Nicholas left, the moment his protection lifted, they'd hate her for this humiliation more than they'd regretted causing hers. "Get up," Nicholas said, disgust dripping from the words. "All of you, get out. If I see any of your faces again, if I hear you've been within a mile of my daughter, there won't be a conversation. There won't be a warning. Do you understand?" They scrambled to their feet, backing toward the door like animals released from a trap, still not trusting their freedom. Leo grabbed his jacket, the laugher his phone, the tattooed man nothing he just fled, disappearing into the night beyond the bar entrance. The door swung shut behind them, and the bar exhaled collectively. Conversations resumed in careful murmurs. The bartender emerged from the back room. Someone turned the music back on, volume low, as if loud sounds might summon more violence. Nicholas turned to face Alicia fully, and she saw him clearly for the first time in 8 years. The silver in his hair, the new lines around his eyes, the way he held himself more carefully, like a weapon kept sheathed but never dull. His tattoos had spread since she'd last seen him, new ink along his collarbone visible above his open shirt, symbols and names she didn't recognize. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice stripped of the command he'd used on the mobsters, now just soft and breaking. "Did they beyond the uniform? Did they—" "No," Alicia said, the word coming out harder than intended. "You got here before." She couldn't finish the sentence. Relief flooded Nicholas's face so completely it looked like pain. "Thank God. He reached for her, hand extending, then stopped himself, fingers curling into a fist as he remembered she didn't want his touch. The gesture cracked something in Alicia's chest. 8 years of anger, 8 years of carefully constructed walls, and he could still break her with something as simple as respecting her boundaries. "What are you doing here?" she asked, pulling his jacket tighter even as she wanted to throw it at him. "How did you know where I—" The answer arrived before she finished asking. "You've been watching me." It wasn't a question. Nicholas didn't insult her by denying it. "Yes. For how long? Since you left." The admission should have enraged her. Should have felt like violation. Like proof he'd never respected her wishes. Never let her go. Instead, it felt like confirmation of something she'd suspected every time a threat disappeared. Too conveniently. Every time her rent was mysteriously forgiven. Every time luck seemed to favor her in a city that chewed up women like her and spit out the bones. "I asked you to stay away," Alicia said, her voice shaking with something between fury and grief. "I asked you for one thing: to let me go. To let me live without your world, without your protection, without—" "I did stay away," Nicholas interrupted gently. "I never approached you, never interfered directly, never let you know I was there. You built your life exactly how you wanted, Alicia. I just made sure you survived long enough to live it." "That's not staying away." Her voice rose now, months of exhaustion and years of suppressed emotion pouring out. "That's control. That's manipulation. You don't get to make those choices for me. You don't get to decide what I need or how to protect me when your protection is what killed Mama." The bar had gone quiet again, but neither of them noticed. Nicholas absorbed the words like physical blows, his face tight with pain he didn't try to hide. "You're right," he said simply. "You're absolutely right. My life killed her, my enemies, my choices, my empire. I built everything to protect our family, and it destroyed us instead." Alicia's breath came in ragged gasps, tears streaming freely now, her body shaking with the force of finally saying what she'd held back for 8 years. "I hate you," she whispered. "I hate what you are, what you did, what you made our lives." "I know," Nicholas said, his own eyes glistening. "I know, Mija, and I've hated myself every day since. The endearment, Mija." My daughter broke through her defenses like a bullet through glass. She hadn't heard it in 8 years, hadn't realized how much she'd missed it until this moment. "Why now?" Alicia asked, her voice small and lost. "Why show up now, after all this time?" Nicholas looked at her with such profound sadness it seemed to age him another decade. "Because I was coming to apologize tonight anyway. I've been building the courage for months. I was walking here to ask if you'd let me buy you coffee. Let me try to explain. Let me begin to make amends." He paused, jaw working. "I never imagined I'd walk in to find you." His voice broke completely. "To find you going through exactly what I swore I'd never let happen again." The bar felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in, the amber light too dim and too revealing at once. Alicia stood, wrapped in her father's jacket, her torn uniform underneath a reminder of how quickly dignity could be stripped away. The other patrons had returned to their drinks, their conversations, pretending the last 20 minutes hadn't happened, pretending they hadn't watched, hadn't laughed, hadn't pulled out phones to record a woman's humiliation. Nicholas stood 3 feet away, close enough to reach for but respecting the distance she needed. His hands hung at his sides, ink-stained knuckles scarred from decades of violence, but held carefully open, not in threat, but in offering, or surrender. "Coffee," Alicia repeated, the word feeling absurd after everything. "You were coming here to ask me for coffee." "Yes. After 8 years of silence, you thought coffee would fix." She stopped, anger and exhaustion warring in her voice. "What did you think would happen? That I'd see you and forget everything? That we'd sit in some cafe and pretend Mama didn't bleed out on our kitchen floor?" Nicholas flinched but didn't look away. "No, I knew you wouldn't forget. I haven't forgotten. I see it every time I close my eyes. Her face. Your face. The moment I realized I'd failed the only two people who mattered." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I wasn't coming to ask for forgiveness, Alicia. I was coming to tell you that I understand why you can't give it." The answer caught her off guard. She'd prepared for 8 years of arguments against his justifications, his excuses, his attempts to make the Empire sound noble or necessary. She hadn't prepared for capitulation. "Then why come at all?" she asked. "Because you deserve to know that I've spent every day of the last 8 years trying to become someone worthy of being your father." Nicholas's voice carried a weight that came from carrying guilt without relief. Not the boss, not the legend, just a man who loved his daughter enough to let her go, and has been trying to earn the right to say hello. Alicia felt tears threatening again, hot and unwanted. She'd cried more tonight than in the past 8 years combined. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't get to show up and say the right things and make me feel..." "Feel what?" Nicholas asked gently. "Like maybe I've been wrong," she whispered. "Like maybe you're not just the monster I needed you to be so I could justify leaving. Like maybe it's more complicated than..." She stopped, shaking her head violently. No, I can't do this. I can't let you back in just because you saved me tonight." "I didn't save you tonight," Nicholas said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "I was late. I walked in, after they'd already hurt you, already torn your uniform, already made you relive the worst kind of powerlessness." His jaw tightened. "If I'd been here 5 minutes earlier, if I'd been doing my job as your father instead of rehearsing an apology outside..." "Stop," Alicia cut him off. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself the victim here." "I'm not the victim. You are." Nicholas took a careful step closer, testing boundaries. "You're the one who ran from violence and ended up right back in it. You're the one who chose poverty over blood money and still got hurt. You're the one who asked me to stay away and suffered because I actually listened." The words hit like accusations, but Alicia heard the truth underneath. He was right. She'd spent 8 years convincing herself that distance from her father meant distance from his world, that changing her name and working honest jobs made her invisible to the kind of men who thought women were disposable. She'd been wrong. "The Red Vein is mob-owned," Nicholas said quietly. "Did you know that? Kozlov's territory. I found out 6 months ago when you started working here. I've had people watching, making sure his crew understood you were off limits even if they didn't know why." Alicia's stomach dropped. "The mobsters tonight, Leo, and the others, they weren't Kozlovs?" "No. They're independent contractors. Freelancers who operate in gray spaces between territories, which means they don't follow the rules." Nicholas's expression hardened. "They saw a woman with no protection and decided to make an example, to prove they could. Because I didn't have your name," Alicia said slowly, understanding settling like ice in her veins. "Because I've been hiding from you. I made myself a target." "No," Nicholas said firmly. "They're animals, and animals attack because that's what they do. This isn't your fault, Alicia. You shouldn't need my name to be safe. You shouldn't need anyone's protection to be treated like a human being." "But I do," Alicia said bitterly. "That's the world you helped build, Papa. One where women are only as safe as the men willing to kill for them." The word Papa slipped out before she could stop it. 8 years of refusing to say it, and it emerged now, in anger and accusation and something desperately close to need. Nicholas's face transformed. The careful control cracked, revealing raw emotion underneath hope and pain and love so profound it seemed to physically hurt him. "Alicia, don't," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Don't think that changes anything." "It changes everything," Nicholas said softly. "It means somewhere underneath the hate, you still remember I'm your father. That I was your father before I was a boss, before I made the choices that destroyed us." Alicia wanted to argue, to rebuild the walls he was dismantling with nothing but honesty and proximity. But she was so tired, tired of running, tired of hating, tired of carrying 8 years of grief and anger alone. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to let you back in without losing myself, without becoming part of your world again." "You don't have to be part of my world," Nicholas said. "My world is almost gone, Alicia. I've been dismantling it for years, slowly, quietly, making sure old enemies stayed away, while I reduced everything to the bare minimum needed to stay protected. She stared at him, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the angle. But his eyes held nothing but truth and exhaustion that matched her own. "Why?" she asked. "Why give up everything you built?" Nicholas smiled sadly. "Because my daughter asked me to. Because keeping an empire mattered less than honoring her wishes, even if she never knew I was honoring them." He paused. "Because Christina would have wanted me to choose you over everything else, and I failed her in life. I won't fail her in death." The mention of her mother broke something in Alicia completely. She felt herself crumbling, the careful construction of 8 years collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. And Nicholas, careful, respectful, waiting for permission, opened his arms slightly. An invitation, not a demand. Alicia stood frozen for 3 heartbeats. 4. Fighting against 8 years of conditioning that said needing him was weakness, was betrayal, was surrender. Then she stepped forward and let her father hold her for the first time since the night her mother died. Nicholas held his daughter carefully, like she was made of glass that had already shattered once and been poorly mended. His arms encircled her without crushing, his chin resting lightly on top of her head the way he used to when she was small, and the world seemed conquerable through sheer force of will and violence. His jacket had slipped from her shoulders when she stepped into his embrace, pooling on the floor between them, torn uniform and expensive fabric tangled together. Alicia didn't cry. She'd cried enough tonight. Instead, she simply stood there, breathing in the scent of him cologne she didn't recognize. Cigarette smoke, something sharper underneath that might have been regret or just the accumulation of 8 years lived in shadow. Her hands gripped his shirt, knuckles white, holding on despite everything in her that still screamed to pull away. "I'm sorry," Nicholas whispered into her hair. "For everything. For your mother. For the life I chose. For every moment you spent afraid because my name painted a target on everyone I loved." The apology cracked something deeper inside her, something she'd protected by believing he'd never offer it. Easier to hate a man who thought he'd done nothing wrong than to face the complexity of someone who knew exactly what he'd destroyed and carried it anyway. "Sorry doesn't bring her back," Alicia said against his chest, her voice muffled but steady. "No," Nicholas agreed. "Nothing brings her back. I've tried everything: revenge, penance, prayer, dismantling the empire piece by piece, and she's still gone. You're still motherless, and I'm still the man whose choices killed her." Alicia pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at his face. "Then why apologize? Why pretend words matter when they can't change anything?" "Because you deserve to hear them," Nicholas said simply. "Because for 8 years, I've let you carry the weight of our family's destruction alone. Because even if forgiveness is impossible, you should know that I see what I did. I own it. I don't blame rivals or circumstances or the nature of the business. I blame myself." The words should have satisfied her, should have felt like victory after 8 years of imagined confrontations where she forced him to acknowledge his guilt. Instead, they just felt heavy, like responsibility she didn't want, like a burden he was trying to share that she'd built her entire identity around carrying alone. "I don't know what to do with that," Alicia admitted, stepping back fully now, creating space. "I don't know how to." She gestured helplessly between them. "We can't just hug and pretend 8 years didn't happen. Pretend tonight didn't happen." "No," Nicholas agreed. "We can't." He bent to retrieve his jacket from the floor, shaking it out once before draping it back across her shoulders. His movements were gentle, paternal in a way that made her chest ache with longing for the father he'd been before blood and business consumed him. "What do you want from me?" Alicia asked, the question emerging sharper than intended. "Why really come here tonight? To absolve yourself? To feel better about the empire you built on corpses? To ask if you'd let me try," Nicholas interrupted. "Not to fix things. Not to erase the past. Just to try to be your father again, in whatever capacity you'd allow. Coffee once a month. A phone call on your birthday. Even just knowing I could say hello if I saw you on the street." He paused, his voice dropping. "I wasn't coming to demand access to your life, Alicia. I was coming to ask permission to exist on the periphery of it." The humility in his voice shocked her more than the violence he'd displayed toward the mobsters. This was Nicholas Diaz, a man who'd commanded empires, who'd made grown men kneel with a glance, who'd bent an entire city to his will through calculated brutality, asking for permission, like a supplicant at a church he'd been excommunicated from. "And now?" Alicia asked. "After tonight? After walking in and seeing—" She couldn't finish, couldn't name what he'd witnessed. What do you want now? Nicholas's jaw tightened, emotion warring with control. Now I want to burn this entire bar to the ground. I want to find every man who laughed while you suffered and teach them what real suffering looks like. I want to make examples so brutal that my name becomes synonymous with protection again, so absolute that no one would ever dare. Stop, Alicia said firmly. Nicholas stopped mid-sentence, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing slightly elevated. She saw it then, the violence still living inside him, coiled and ready, barely restrained by years of attempted redemption. He'd dismantled his empire, but he hadn't dismantled himself. That's exactly what I don't want, Alicia said. More violence, more revenge, more blood adding to blood until we're all drowning in it. They hurt you, Nicholas said, his voice rough with barely contained fury. They put their hands on you, tore your clothing, humiliated you in front of a room full of people who did nothing. And you want me to just what? Let it go? Pretend it didn't happen? No, Alicia said. I want you to let me decide what happens next. Not your reputation, not your need for revenge. Me. The words landed like a challenge, and she watched her father wrestle with them. His entire identity had been built on protection through dominance, on love expressed through violence on behalf of those he cared for. Asking him not to retaliate was asking him to fundamentally change the language he'd spoken his entire adult life. What do you want? Nicholas asked finally, the question costing him something. Alicia took a breath, organizing thoughts that had been chaos moments before. I want those men to face consequences, real ones, but not execution. Not some mob justice that makes you feel powerful and leaves bodies in alleys. Then what? Nicholas asked, genuine confusion in his voice. I want them afraid, Alicia said slowly, working it out as she spoke. I want them to know that touching me was the worst mistake they ever made, but I also want them alive to remember it. I want them stripped of whatever protection they had, whatever power they thought they wielded in places like this. I want them to know what it feels like to be vulnerable. Nicholas studied her face, and she saw something shift in his expression, not disappointment, but something closer to pride. You want them to feel what you felt. Yes, that's crueler than killing them, Nicholas observed. Good, Alicia said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. They don't get the mercy of a quick death. They get to live knowing they're marked. Knowing that every shadow might be you coming back to finish what you started. Knowing that the only reason they're breathing is because your daughter, the woman they brutalized, chose to let them live. A slow smile spread across Nicholas's face, dark and approving. You're more my daughter than you want to admit. The observation stung because it was true. She'd spent 8 years running from his world, but she understood its logic perfectly, understood that sometimes mercy was the cruelest weapon, that survival with fear was worse than death with dignity. I'm my mother's daughter too, Alicia countered. She would have wanted the cycle to stop. No more killings, no more revenge that spawns more revenge. Just consequences, and then... She paused, the next words difficult. And then we move forward. We? Nicholas repeated carefully, as if the word might disappear if he held it too tight. Alicia met his eyes. I don't forgive you. I might never forgive you. But, she swallowed hard, but maybe we can figure out what comes after hate, if you really meant what you said, if you're really willing to try. Then we try, Nicholas said, the words carrying the weight of a vow. On your terms, at your pace, however you need it to be. Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice. The bar around them had returned to its normal rhythm, glasses clinking, low conversations. The ambient noise of people pretending tonight had been ordinary. But she felt changed, like something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of herself and the man standing before her. First, Nicholas said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. We handle tonight. You said consequences, I'll deliver them. But I need you to understand what that means. Tell me. Nicholas gestured toward the door. Those 3, Leo, the others, they're independent operators. No real allegiance, no protection worth mentioning. By tomorrow morning, every crew in this city will know what they did and who they did it to. They'll be radioactive, unemployable, hunted. You can do that with a few phone calls? Alicia asked, though she already knew the answer. I can do that with 1 phone call, Nicholas corrected. My empire might be smaller, but my reputation isn't. When Nicholas Diaz marks someone, they stay marked. The casual certainty in his voice should have disturbed her. Instead, it felt like safety, the kind she'd spent 8 years pretending she didn't need. What about this place? Alicia asked, glancing around the red vein. Kozlov's territory. Will there be problems? Nicholas's expression hardened. Kozlov and I have history. Not friendly, but not enemies. He'll understand that what happened tonight crossed lines even he respects. His people should have intervened when those animals put hands on you. They didn't know who I was, Alicia pointed out. They knew you were a woman being assaulted in an establishment under his protection. Nicholas countered. That should have been enough. The fact that it wasn't tells me Kozlov's gotten sloppy, let his territory become a playground for freelance predators. He pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating his face in harsh blue light. His fingers moved with surprising dexterity for someone his age, typing out a message that Alicia couldn't see. What are you doing? She asked. Calling in a debt, Nicholas said without looking up. Kozlov owes me from the '09 territory disputes. I kept his nephew alive when others wanted him dead. That debt buys your safety here and everywhere else in this city. I don't want to work here anymore, Alicia said suddenly, the realization arriving fully formed. I can't come back to this place after tonight. Nicholas looked up from his phone, his expression softening. Then don't. You don't need to. I need to work, Alicia said firmly. I'm not taking your money, if that's what you're thinking. I meant what I said 8 years ago. I build my own life. I know, Nicholas said, and I respect that. But there's a difference between blood money and a father helping his daughter. Let me ask around legitimate businesses, clean money, places where you'd be safe. Not because of my name, but because they're actually decent places to work. Alicia wanted to argue, to insist on complete independence, but exhaustion was setting in, and the practical part of her brain recognized the offer for what it was: not control, but genuine help. I'll think about it, she said finally. Nicholas's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his mouth tightening into a thin line. Kozlov just confirmed. The 3 from tonight are officially persona non grata in every mob-controlled establishment in the city. No work, no protection, no safe harbor. That's it? Alicia asked. They're just cast out? That's everything. Nicholas corrected. In our world, being cast out is worse than death. They're prey now. Every enemy they've made, every debt they owe, every person they've crossed, all of it, comes due with no one to hide behind. Alicia absorbed this, feeling the strange satisfaction of justice that didn't require her father's hands to get bloody. And the bar? The people who watched and laughed? Nicholas's eyes swept the room, and she saw several patrons quickly look away. They'll remember tonight. They'll remember that the woman they watched suffer is Nicholas Diaz's daughter. Word spreads fast in this world, Alicia. By morning, your face will be known. Your name will mean protection. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it felt like chains in a different form, protected, yes, but also marked, branded, forever connected to a name she'd spent 8 years trying to shed. I don't want to be Nicholas Diaz's daughter, Alicia said quietly. I want to be Alicia. Just Alicia. Her father's face crumpled slightly, pain flashing across his features before he controlled it. You are Alicia. You've always been more than my name, more than my legacy. I'm sorry that my world keeps trying to define you by it. Then help me be undefined, Alicia said. Help me be safe without being marked. Help me exist without every person I meet calculating my worth through you. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought. Finally, he nodded. I'll try. I can't promise perfect invisibility. Too many people know you exist now. But I can try to make sure your name means you, not me. That's all I'm asking, Alicia said. Then that's what you'll get, Nicholas promised. Now let's get you out of here. You need rest, new clothes, and distance from this place. Alicia looked down at herself, torn uniform, her father's jacket, bruises forming on her wrists. She looked like exactly what she was, a survivor of something that should never have happened. Take me home, she said. My home, the apartment you've been watching. I want you to see how I've been living, what I chose over your world. Nicholas nodded slowly. All right. I'd be honored. The night air hit Alicia like a slap when they stepped outside the Red Vein, cold and clean after the bar's oppressive atmosphere of cigarette smoke and spilled alcohol. She pulled Nicholas's jacket tighter around herself, the expensive fabric a stark contrast to her torn uniform underneath. The street was quiet, just a few cars passing, their headlights cutting through darkness before disappearing around corners. Nicholas's town car sat at the curb, black and anonymous. Rafa stood beside it, older than Alicia remembered, his gray stubble catching streetlight. He nodded respectfully when he saw her, his eyes kind but asking no questions. "Miss Alicia," he said simply. The title Miss felt like acknowledgement that she was her own person first, her father's daughter second. She appreciated it more than he could know. "Rafa," she acknowledged. "It's been a long time." "Too long," he agreed, opening the back door. Alicia hesitated, one foot on the curb, suddenly aware that getting into this car meant something. Meant accepting her father's presence in her life again, even temporarily. Meant admitting that complete independence was a fiction she'd been telling herself. Nicholas noticed her hesitation. "We can walk if you prefer. It's not far, according to—" He stopped himself. "According to the address, I shouldn't know but do." Despite everything, Alicia almost smiled. "The car is fine. My feet hurt, and I'm tired of pretending tonight didn't happen." She slid into the back seat, Nicholas following but maintaining careful distance. The leather was soft, the interior immaculate. This was the kind of car she'd ridden in as a child luxury, that had felt normal until her mother's death taught her the true cost of comfort built on violence. Rafa pulled away from the curb smoothly, and for several blocks, nobody spoke. Alicia watched the city pass by familiar streets she'd walked 1,000 times, now seen from behind tinted windows that made everything look distant and unreal. "I live above a laundromat," Alicia said finally, breaking the silence. "4th floor, no elevator. The hot water works maybe half the time. My neighbors are loud, and the building smells like detergent and cooking oil." "Okay," Nicholas said carefully. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand," Alicia continued, her voice steady. "I chose that life. I chose struggling over your money, and I don't regret it." Nicholas turned to look at her, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I never thought you would. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Alicia. Stronger than me. I built power through fear. You built a life through sheer will." "Don't romanticize my poverty," Alicia said sharply. "There's nothing noble about struggling to pay rent or skipping meals to afford bus fare. I survived. That's all." "That's everything," Nicholas countered gently. "Surviving without compromise, without taking the easy path that's more impressive than anything I ever built." Alicia wanted to argue but found she couldn't. The exhaustion was settling deeper now, adrenaline fading and leaving behind the hollow ache of trauma processed but not healed. "Turn here," she directed Rafa, recognizing her neighborhood. "3rd building on the left." The car pulled up outside a tired-looking apartment complex, its facade cracked and stained. The laundromat on the ground floor was closed, but its neon sign still flickered wash-dry fold, like a promise only partially kept. Nicholas stared up at the building, his expression carefully neutral. Alicia watched him take in the cracked sidewalk, the graffiti on the entrance door, the broken intercom system. This was her world, real, unglamorous, earned through every hour of work and every refusal of his help. "4th floor," Alicia said, opening her door before Rafa could get out. "No elevator." "I heard you the first time," Nicholas said, following her out. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the car idling behind them. Alicia felt the weight of decision pressing down. Invite him up or say goodbye here. Continue this fragile reconnection or retreat back into safe distance. "You can come up," she said finally. "Just for a minute. Just to see." Nicholas nodded, and Alicia caught something like relief in his expression before he hit it. She led the way inside, through the broken entrance door, past the wall of dented mailboxes, upstairs that creaked under their weight. Nicholas followed silently, his expensive shoes on worn linoleum creating an almost comical contrast. By the 3rd floor, Alicia's legs were shaking not from exertion but from everything. The night's trauma, the emotional confrontation, the impossible complexity of letting her father back into her life after 8 years of successfully keeping him out. "Almost there," she said, mostly to herself. They reached the 4th floor, and Alicia stopped outside apartment 4C. Her hand trembled as she pulled keys from her pocket separate from anything in the bar, kept safe in the one place the mobsters hadn't searched. "This is it," she said, unlocking the door. "This is what I chose over you." She pushed the door open and stepped inside, Nicholas following. The apartment was small studio efficiency with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a window that looked out onto an alley. Her bed was a futon against one wall, her clothes in a small dresser, her life condensed into maybe 300 square feet, but it was clean, organized, hers. Nicholas stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Alicia watched his face, waiting for judgment or pity. Instead, she saw something else, respect. maybe even pride. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "It's a shoebox," Alicia corrected. "It's yours," Nicholas said. "Built by you, maintained by you, free from everything I represent. It's perfect because you made it that way." Alicia moved to her small window, looking out at the alley below. Somewhere in the building, a baby was crying. Music thumped through the walls, bass-heavy and too loud, but familiar enough that she barely noticed anymore. This was her life, unglamorous and difficult, and completely her own. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, her back still to her father. "I don't know how to have you in my life without losing myself again." Nicholas remained near the door, respecting the space she needed. "We figure it out slowly, one step at a time. No expectations, no demands, just," he paused, searching for the right word, "just presence, if you'll allow it." Alicia turned to face him. In the apartment's harsh overhead light, she could see every line on his face, every year that had passed, every burden he'd carried alone. He looked older than she remembered, more human, less the monster she'd needed him to be. "Coffee," she said suddenly. "Next week, Wednesday afternoon. There's a cafe 3 blocks from here. Neutral territory, public, safe." Hope flashed across Nicholas's face, quickly controlled but unmistakable. "I'll be there." "What time?" 2 o'clock, Alicia said. "And if I change my mind, if I don't show up, then I'll understand," Nicholas finished. "And I'll try again the next week, or the next month, or however long it takes. I've waited 8 years, Alicia. I can wait longer if that's what you need." The promise should have felt like pressure. Instead, it felt like freedom, the knowledge that her healing would happen on her timeline, that her father's love wasn't conditional on her forgiveness. "I need you to leave now," Alicia said, not unkindly. "Tonight it was too much. I need space to process everything." "Of course." Nicholas moved toward the door, then stopped. He reached into his jacket, his suit jacket, not the one still draped around Alicia's shoulders, and pulled out a card. "My number, direct line. If you need anything at all, call, day or night." Alicia took the card, simple white stock with black numbers. No name, no title, just a phone number that represented a lifetime of complicated history. "And Alicia?" Nicholas paused in the doorway. "What you said in the bar about wanting consequences without death? About breaking the cycle your mother would have been proud. She always believed I could be better. She saw something in me worth saving." His voice caught. She'd be glad to know our daughter inherited that vision. Tears threatened again, but Alicia forced them back. "Good night, Papa." The word came easier this time, less weighted with anger and more with simple acknowledgement of what he was, her father. Flawed and trying, present after 8 years of absence. "Good night, Misha," Nicholas said softly. Then he was gone, his footsteps receding down the stairs, leaving Alicia alone in her small apartment with his jacket and his card and the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. She moved to lock the door, then stopped. Instead, she walked to her futon and sat down, still wearing his jacket, still smelling his cologne and cigarette smoke. She pulled out her phone and stared at the card, memorizing the number before tucking it into her dresser drawer beneath folded clothes. Outside, she heard a car engine start the town car pulling away, taking her father back to whatever life he'd built in her absence. Alicia stood and finally removed his jacket, hanging it carefully on the back of her single chair. She'd return it on Wednesday, or maybe she'd keep it. She hadn't decided yet. She changed out of her torn uniform, the fabric ripping further as she pulled it over her head. She'd throw it away tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to sleep and pretend that 8 years of distance hadn't collapsed in a single evening. But as she lay down, exhausted and emotionally raw, Alicia found herself thinking not about the humiliation or the violence, but about her father's face when she'd called him Papa, about the way he'd held her carefully, like she was precious and breakable, about the promise in his voice when he said he'd wait however long it took. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness felt impossible, maybe even undeserved. But maybe, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, maybe there was something beyond forgiveness. Something harder and more honest, coexistence with complexity, relationship built on truth instead of fantasy, love that acknowledged damage without being destroyed by it. Wednesday would come. She'd decide then whether to show up, whether to take another step toward the father she'd spent 8 years running from. But tonight, in her small apartment that smelled like detergent and determination, Alicia Diaz allowed herself to imagine a future where she was both independent and connected, both her own person and her father's daughter. The beginning after the end. Not redemption, not reconciliation, but something more fragile and more real. The possibility of building something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.